Good evening to all of you. Feel free to say hello in your mother tongue and tell us where you are in the chat room. And I'm very much happy to welcome Michael Zech for the last lecture of the International Campus Waldorf. Michael was born in Munich in 1957. He has studied literature, German literature and history. He has done a doctorate in 2012 about history teaching in Waldorf schools, and so this is really his expertise. And he has been a Waldorf teacher since 1983 and started doing teacher training in 1992. And since 2013, he has become professor, first junior professor, 2018 full professor at Alanus University. And especially this year, he started a new debate, a new discussion around the question of how to teach history in Waldorf schools, the question of how to teach cultural history. And this will be the topic of his talk today, and I'm very much happy you can do this. And yes, the stage is yours, Michael.
Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for the friendly and appreciative introduction. I'm hesitantly accepted this invitation to this lecture, as I'm very aware of my limited knowledge in English, but Joost, however, gave more weight to my cultural scientific expertise and encouraged me to make this contribution. In a face-to-face lecture, I would now benefit from gestures or linguistic empathy as secondary forms of expression. In the Zoom format, I am instead dependent on your favorable consideration. So, now I will start with the presentation. Okay. So, I would like to begin my presentation with a few preliminary remarks. Firstly, I would like to talk about the phenomenon of personal interest. Interest expresses the intention of a subject. Interest is a part of the intention that underlies an individual's biography. An interest connects the ego with the surrounding world. Specify this relationship questions the surrounding world. In this act, the surrounding world is included in the horizons of one's own personality, become part of the ego. Steiner called this relational aspect of the ego the peripheral ego. Because the ego only ever realizes itself in connection to something else, this other is always the cause of selfhood. In this respect, it can be concluded that this peripheral other, which conditioned the I being, can also be regarded as a part of this I. We are currently facing numerous hardships as individuals. The hardship of the biosphere, the hardship caused by war and violence, the hardship caused by hunger, social injustices. When these hardships touched us, they become part of our own self, unconsciously when we repress them, consciously when we make them part of our responsibility. This responsibility creates atmosphere. It is in this atmosphere that the ideal of valuing and respecting of dignity of every individual was born. The sensitivity awakened in us in face of discriminatory, disparaging, typologizing, and racist judgment. This sensitivity is an expression of respect for the individuality and dignity of human being. Steiner Waldorf schools are based on the educational concept of accompanying individuation pedagogically in such a way that the biography can unfold according to its own intentions. As a civil society institution, Waldorf schools fulfill the general public task of school education on the one hand, while on the other, it sees itself obliged to promote the self-foundation of individuality in the orientation of its work. This is an idealistic self-claim against which it must be measured. According to its self-image, education should work in such a way that the individuality of the pupils does not lead to egoistical, narcissistic self-centeredness, but is instead realized in a continuous world-centeredness. This is called the concept of individuality in Waldorf education is based on the assumption that being or becoming an ego is constantly realized in relation to the surrounding world. This results in a pragmatic spiritual understanding of biography. The people and situation that a subject encounter are the cause and the condition of every self-realization. For a pedagogy founded in this way, it is therefore a necessary condition to establish a consciousness relationship with the challenges of the present time. These are characterized by the intense struggle for a changed relationship to the biosphere, for peaceful coexistence, for social fairness, and for an open concept of society that allows every individual to realize themselves according to their own idealistic self-claim. I would like to move now on from these preliminary remarks on the subject of cultural history at Waldorf schools with a reference to the current situation in Germany. In the 4th grade in Waldorf schools, the subject of local history is taught at a preliminary stage of history lesson. In Germany, this is called Heimatkunde. That means homeland, knowledge about homeland. In English, as a local regional history. In German, the term Heimat, homeland, takes center stage. In the past, pupils who grow up in one place learned about their own homeland. Today, the majority of the pupils have moved to the school location from other areas, many as migrants. They come from other homelands and are now expected to put down roots in a new neighborhood. They are in a dialogue with their home civilization. According to the Federal Statistical Office in Germany, more than 40% of the pupils in the public schools in Germany have a migration background. In German Waldorf schools, the proportion of students with a migrant background varies greatly, but is on average lower than in state schools. This situation requires a different understanding of homeland study and English regional studies. But there is a much bigger problem. In Germany, there is still a relatively insignificant National Socialist Party. This Nazi party has been calling itself Die Heimat, homeland, since June of this year. The aim of this party is to protect its homelands against foreigners or strangers. However, most neo-Nazis are not organized in this party, but in the party AfD, Alternative for Germany, which is gaining more supporters from election to election. the problem? Many of its members publicly sympathize with the ideas of the Waldorf schools. One of the most popular leaders of the alternative of Germany, Björn Höcke, publicly refers to his reading of Steiner. The goal of these right-wing extremists are radical xenophobia, national greatness, and combating cultural diversity. Of course, this goes opposed to the goal of the Waldorf schools, but nevertheless, the right-wing extremists sympathize with the Waldorf Steiner schools. So, we have to clarify our position. We have to ask ourselves why right-wing extremists see the Waldorf schools as an institution that educationally support their nationalist and xenophobic worldview. They obviously perceive the Waldorf schools as traditional, conservative, and Germanophile schools. In the following, I would like to analyze cultural history at Waldorf schools in 4 steps. Oh, that's the wrong direction. So. History is currently at the center of major conflict. This is particularly true of the war between Russia and Ukraine and between Israel and the Hamas terrorists. Our students, who mainly inform themselves via TikTok and YouTube, react with indignation to the extreme cruelty shown there. Their indignation is motivated by ideas, but without dialogue and, above all, without different information. Their reactions are expressed in devaluation, hatred, suggestions of destroying the other side. We therefore have the task of talking about these current events with the students. They need the opportunity to express their attitudes because only then they can be confronted with other judgments and can transform their own judgment. They need differentiated historical information in order not to follow the illusion of a simple interpretation of an extremely complicated world. There's also the challenge of freeing the historical narratives on which school lessons are based from the colonial perspective inherent in them, so that the hierarchical, Eurocentristic, racist, and potentially imperialist interpretation of global events are not passed on to the future generation. Therefore, I would like to briefly address the conditions for open and lifelong identity formation. Identity is constantly being negotiated in 3 levels of relationships: in relation to individual biographical self-claims, in relation to cultural affiliations, in relation to humanity. This identity formation must be practiced. Instead of imparting a specific identity, Schule has today the task of stimulating the dialogue between the levels of individuality, cultural affiliation, and orientation to the humanity and mankind. Instead of joining together collectively, students have to learn to generate meaning from their own ego-world relationship on these 3 levels. The contrast suggested here between open and closed concept of identity and society is currently the subject of a worldwide debate. Every concept for teaching history must be discussed against the background of the political and sociological conditions. Unexpected for many, the early 21st century is characterized worldwide by the debate about two polar opposing concepts of society and identity. It has long been accepted as an open question whether those who strive for the transformation to one world in cultural diversity and individual self-determination can assert themselves against those who oppose these goals, because they see their cultural or national identity threatened by the concept of lived openness. Therefore, they stand up for collective defined values, norms, and traditions in a protected area of validity. The following positions in the debate are opposed to each other. Worldwide, this conflict also plays out at the level of the battle over the interpretation of history. The authority to interpret historical narratives is important because they can be used and legitimate claims and to give a moral dimension to the political action. In the course of this instrumentalization of history for political purposes, the question of the orientation of historical education is naturally also raised. While the proponents of an open society who are committed to humanitarian values, cultural diversity, the appreciation of individual rights, social solidarity, and a biospheric awareness favor world history concept. The critic of interculturality and globality call for national historical curricula. The Waldorf schools are clearly positioned here according to their current curriculum for the history lesson. History lesson at Waldorf schools follow a human history approach, pursues a culturally historical approach, understand culture today as an expression of all objectifications and areas of human praxis, seeks to avoid any discrimination and judgmental hierarchy of lifestyles, world views, and cultures. According to the founder of their educational concept, Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf schools are cosmopolitan-orientated institutions. Steiner said, "You will have seen that even if the Waldorf schools principle originates from a very specific language area, it is truly not something national, but something international in the best sense of the word, because it is universal. In this respect, since the foundation of the first Waldorf school in 1919, history lessons have been orientated towards cultural and world history rather than national history. It is remarkable at a time when national historical positions dominate the public debate and curricula after the First World War, Steiner recommended a humanity-orientated curriculum to his school. I will address its problem later, but now we want to analyze Steiner's special understanding of world history. 3 methodological approaches to the phenomenon of history can be distinguished in different phases of Steiner's work. History in an epistemological writing before 1900, presentation of history in theosophical tradition and terminology from 1901, Steiner's historical symptomatology from 1917. Now I discovered the first time when he used the term symptomatology was 1910. But nevertheless, the first approach to history is characterized by the following quotes. Here, our consciousness has to do with itself, with the individual human spirit, with the creation of culture, literature, with the successive scientific beliefs, with the creation of art. Spiritual things are grasped by the spirit. It is human action, creations, ideas that we are dealing with. It is a confrontation between people and themselves and their species. And that is why in history, the subject of which is man, one cannot speak of external influences on his actions, of ideas that lie in time, least of all from a plan that underlies it. All a priori construction of plans that are supposed to be the basis of history is against the historical method as it arises from the nature of history. These statements come from the texts in which Steiner characterized the conditions of the free and self-determined human being. The focus here is the book Philosophy of Freedom, published 1894. There, Steiner defined individuality as an open telos. Since humans emancipate themselves as individuals through an autopoietic process, historical event must also be viewed as an open process. Any theological certainty is clearly rejected here because it contradicts the essence of history and of the free individual. Such a definition could be included in every current discourses about history on universities. But that's, with Steiner's second approach, difficult. From 1901, Steiner worked within the framework of the Theosophical Society. There he adopted the heptomatic or self-fold concept of time, which can be tracked back to Babylonian culture. Later, he developed this concept with the result of his spiritual research. Between 1906 and 1910, on this basis, and on the basis of its own spiritual research, he worked out a development concept that integrated the evolution of humans into the evolution of the entire cosmos. What is told here is a human history in a cosmic dimension. This concept was published in outline in Steiner's Occult Science 1910. 1908, Steiner emancipated his concept from the theosophical terminology. After this time, he never used the term Aryan race or root race, but he continues with the historical structure of Atlantean and post-Atlantean period. The third approach to history is Steiner's historical symptomatology, the discussion of which would go beyond the scope given here. Therefore, just two characterizing statements. You only come to a historical consideration when you connect people to the supersensible and look for in the historical facts what is initially only revealed to you, a supersensible process in world events in which people are interwoven. Then history becomes something other than the consideration of the successive events. Then history becomes something what I would like to call a symptomatology. Because the concept of cultural epochs raises a number of questions today, I will now analyze it in more details. Please remember the dates of the cultural epochs just shown. Steiner did not derive them empirically, but rather took them from the cosmic rhythm of the spring equinox that moves through the zodiac. The entire cycle takes place in 25,920 years. Every 1,160 years, the vernal equinox moves to a new sign of the zodiac. This corresponds to 1 month of the Platonic cosmic year. Steiner attributed this time to the duration of a culture epoch. This means that Steiner orders history according to a cosmic universal principle. This seemed to be in contradiction to what he said in the 1890s. In 1909, in the lecture cycle, The Orient in the Light of the Occident, Steiner described the number 7 as an archetypal number for the course of time. Consequently, his ideal concept of development is based entirely on a 7-fold structure. In his occult science, Steiner distinguished between 7 planetary states that preceded or will follow at the 4th state of the Earth. In the Earth state, there are 7 ages. The post-Atlantean age is the 5th age now. An age is divided into 7 cultural epochs of 2,160 years each. We go through the 5th post-Atlantean cultural epoch, modern period, beginning 1413. In the following, I would like to use Steiner's general concept of human development to explain why the 7-fold ideal understanding of time should be understood as a transformation concept. The idea expressed here is that the lower members of the human condition can be transformed in the higher members of the human being. You know this. The soul body transforms into the spirit self through individual spiritual penetration. This means that the soul body is not only individualized, but at the same time it places itself in a higher level spiritual context. The same applies to the transformation of the etheric body and the physical body. The common concept of the biographical development is based on the rhythm of 7 years. The cultural development is based on the sequences of 7 areas or periods. The principle is a general one. It occurs in the reality of the physical space in numerous variations. it always manifests itself individually in a wonderful diversity. Now, back to the dating of the cultural periods. Analogous to the biographical transformation is the transformation of cultural periods. The proto or ancient Indian culture will transform in future to the final period of the cycle. The Proto-Persian culture will transform to the period which should follow our time. Our time is an ongoing transformation of the Egyptian Babylonian period. Just like the ego in the biographical concept, the Greco-Roman area in which the birth of Christ is located acts as a mirror axis. Steiner embedded this transformation in the following story. A small group of people who are able to develop is led from the sinking Atlantic continent to the Central Asia by the high initiate Manu. There, 7 rishis are initiated by him who inspired the Proto-Indian area and the development of the etheric body. From this culture, the Proto-Persian area was inspired, in which the astral body was cultivated and at the end of which there was Zarathustra. In the Egyptian Babylonian culture, the sentient soul was developed. In the Greco-Romanian antiquity, the intellectual soul was developed. In our time, the consciousness soul is developing since 1413. The history of humanity described here is aimed at Europe and its civilization. Later, Steiner locates the concern of anthroposophy in the Waldorf schools in this culture of the consciousness soul. You know the famous sentences with which Steiner opened the training course for the first Waldorf teachers. The Waldorf school must be a real cultural act in order to achieve a renewal of the contemporary intellectual life. And it is incumbent on us to feel the importance of our task. We will only do this if we view it as a celebration of the world order. And he addressed to the first Waldorf teachers, the success of this cultural event is in your hands. Now you can imagine the criticism that such a narrative of cultural development receives from current cultural and social discourses. Critics see it as a narrative to justify the elite position of European people and as a structurally racist narrative. In Europe, this narrative underlies the history lesson in the Waldorf school in class 5 and 6. Now to the problems. At first, the problem Atlantis. Unfortunately, despite numerous appeals, the Atlantic myth still plays a problematic role in history lesson in class 5. This is mainly because, contrary to Steiner's intentions, some teachers still teach anthroposophical content in class. This is how the myth takes on the function of factually proven history. The collapse of the continent is therefore not conveyed as a mythical topos of a paradigm shift, but as a factual event. Seeing the decline of a continent at the starting point of Ice Age cultures by calling them post-Atlantean cultures is for this reason very problematic. Such periodization has no place in students' notebooks, but we found it. In this form, they must be considered unscientific. The Proto-Indian and the Proto-Persian culture is a problem. Steiner characterized the cultural epochs between 1906 and 1910 in lectures and in his book Occult Science. He points out that there are no historical references to the Proto-Indian epoch or the Proto-Persian epoch. From his spiritual research, however, he characterizes the forms of consciousness of the Proto-Indian culture as alive in and with the nature, in which inner spiritual life and communication with the surrounding world resonate together. For the ancient Persian culture, he characterizes a dual consciousness, with the introduction of the domestication of plants and animals, and the separation between cultivated garden and wild nature. The immediacy of the soul, that means to react directly, and the soul placed at the service of religion, lead to dialogue and struggle in people. If we, and that's a suggestion, if we essentialize Steiner's characterization of cultural epochs, we can free it from a naive location and temporalization and apply it to the wonderful diversity of global cultures. We no longer perceive his statements at the level of historical fact, but as an ideal development concept. A working group is currently working intensively on this basis to develop new proposals for presentation in the 5th grade, which will replace the exclusively mythical stories of a Proto-Indian and ancient Persian epoch. Instead, the diverse knowledge about cultures before and after settling down should be used. This means expanding Steiner's story of cultural development globally and into that of cultural diversity. Instead of feeling excluded, last week, a Chinese student in Stuttgart asked me this. Instead of feeling excluded by a narrative, every culture can feel included in such a story. To avoid any misunderstanding, I would like to emphasize the telling of myth should not be abandoned. Myths can certainly be used as sources for cultural change. As such, they can be analyzed in high school classes. The class teachers should tell myths without deconstructing them. They enrich the children's biographies if they are simply allowed to absorb the myth and take them into their life as a treasure trove and an experience and memory. Such stories are not only intended to enrich history lessons, but they can be told at the end of the main lesson in any subject. The more, the better. But we still have a look at Steiner's description of cultural periods from different perspectives. You have certainly noticed it can be understood as a racist or structurally racist concept. A small little elite escaped from the sinking Atlantis and from them the development of humanity is advanced in a succession of advanced civilization. And the mission currently culminates in Europe, indeed in the Waldorf schools, since it locates itself as a cultural act in the fifth post-Atlantean epoch. The story which is told in the narrative, in this narrative is based on the history of the Indo-European language and myth context. It was developed in the 19th century. It tells a cultural context that can be traced from India to Europe. It was called Aryan, but before Nazis misused this term as a biological racist criterion. It was an established concept in Europe to derive one's own culture from the Far East. Today, this narrative meets the criteria of structural racism. Structural racism refers to culture and identity concept that, as in biological racism, make collective segments in order to organize them in a hierarchical manner. They suggest categories such as higher and lower, more entitled or less entitled, belonging or not belonging. Potentially, any increased nationalism is structurally racist concept. And of course, a concept of advanced civilizations can be read like this or received like this. If it also emphasizes the importance of European culture for all of humanity, it can be also interpreted as a colonial legitimation of the white Europeans. This is also why it is necessary to essentialize Steiner's inspiration for a human cultural concept and to emancipate it from a naive representation of history. Due to their goal spread, Waldorf schools have an excellent opportunity to use their diversity to exchange ideas about cultural history. Now, just 3 brief comments to the following points of criticism. I believe it cannot be denied that Steiner left a large number of statements in his work that can be described as racist. Anyone who defends or justifies them attributes to questioning Steiner's entire offer. The sentences stand and cannot be discussed away. If you follow the core idea of Waldorf education and understand it as a pedagogy of individuation, as explained here by Jos Sheehan, you can come to the conclusion that Waldorf education is anti-racist. The extent to which contradiction can be found in Steiner's work is irrelevant for Waldorf schools if they do not refer to problematic statements. Of course, it is helpful to note that Steiner's intention was to overcome nationalism and racism. What is important, however, is whether we implement a pedagogy today that respects and promotes every individual, regardless of their physicality, origin, or cultural affiliation. The second problem. Our main problem is unreflected teaching praxis. It arises from the fact that class teachers who have not studied history are dependent on materials and handouts. At the moment, they often take the concept of the predecessors. Handouts for class teachers also recommend traditionally established stories. If a school has its own curriculum, it must be justified against the background of the present time. We become easy victims of criticism when elements are treated as Waldorf qualities just because they have been repeated often or for a long time. The problem, class teachers often don't know what they are saying and how what they are telling will be perceived today. The problem with the extreme right-wing parties. The problem that right-wing extremists sympathize with the cultural understanding of Waldorf schools is a political problem. Apart from the fact that we have to become more involved in political and scientific discourses in order to present Waldorf education as human concept, we have an internal problem to overcome. It has to do with an often naive reception of Steiner. Steiner's great narrative should not be believed and interpreted, but should be thought about and responsibly presented by individuals. A quasi-religious reception of Steiner's statements paves the way for the creation of legends, personality cults, and conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theory explainers of the world, who supposedly speak in the name of Steiner or Waldorf education, offer the right wing's extremists their starting points. Anthroposophy loses its highly inspiring quality when it is received exegetically and dogmatically, or when it is absorbed in the rumors of a great world conspiracy. It must be examined in the thought of each individual. It is an interesting object for right-wing extremists when it is threaded as a collective worldview in a religious tradition. I want to summarize. Transformation of cultural history is not abolition. Science is not against anthroposophy. Reasonable images instead of occult narrative content. The narrative of human individuation should be maintained. Steiner's idea of development and transformation must be expanded into cultural diversity. Realize the Waldorf school in its respective present time. Criticism is a good opportunity to examine yourself. Anthroposophy does not have to be interpreted, but rather be individual presented. In the following, I want to introduce the project Forum History. The Forum History has 27 projects, and they are grouped in 4 areas. The first, basics; the second, history teaching project across grades; the third, project for concrete grades; and the fourth, project organization. In December last year, almost 30 class teachers, history teachers, and teacher training lecturers met in Kassel to take stock of the current theory and praxis of history teaching in German Waldorf schools. We have identified a comprehensive and urgent need for action. Therefore, a project with 27 sub-project was established. These projects are now in progress. They are financially supported by the Pedagogical Research Center in dem Bund der Freien Waldorfschulen. Albert Schmelzer, known to many through his work of the interculturality of Waldorf education. Martin Rosen, known to many worldwide through his involvement in numerous curriculum, project, and teacher training. And I are coordinating the whole project. We receive excellent support from Alexander Hassenstein and the Pedagogical Research Center. At the basic level, there are projects on the decolonization of teaching, Steiner's understanding of culture, symptomatology, universalism, and self-constitution. History teaching projects across grades include, for example, projects to the development of the history curriculum, the methodology, to the feminist perspective in history lesson, or Jewish culture in history lessons. The third level concerns project to develop history lessons in individual school classes. There are currently 8 groups working on this. The first results are expected 2024. And the fourth level concerns to the coordination, networking, and communication of the entire project. I would like to end this contribution with a reference to the cosmopolitan dimension of cultural history. Steiner calls the spiritual signature of our time a Michaelic one. He thus characterizes a way of thinking that relates diversity to one another. It is not intended to universalize, but rather to take into account a human culture in all its great diversity. We can now refer to numerous fellow campaigners to identify with the educational mission. I mean, the philosophers of modern cosmopolitanism, such as Kwame Anthony Appiah, Peng Che, Sailor Ben Habib, Martha Nussbaum, or Corinne Peluchon. Cosmopolitanism founded in antiquity by the Sophists and continuing into the European Enlightenment period argues universally. The statement of Marcus Aurelius is representative of this. If we have the ability to think in common, then we also have reason in common. Then we also have the law in common. If that is the case, then the humans are citizens. But then we share in a kind of state constitution. This is universalist argumentation. Modern cosmopolitanism argues otherwise. Cosmopolitanism, which is based on individuality and cultural diversity, distances itself from the universalistic idea of ascribing and rationally based generalities to value and cultures. Modern cosmopolitanism is about the ability to meet and engage with one another in acceptance of diversity, with interest, respect, and without hegemonic demands. And I believe this is an capacity approach. Kwame Anthony Appiah places relationship and conversation at the center of his cosmopolitanism. Without expectations of result, without expectations of result, conversations takes place across boundaries, can be a joy or a torture, depending on the circumstances. But there's only one thing most people are certain of, then the inevitable. And a conversation does not have to lead to consents about anything, and especially not about values. It's enough if the conversation is enough to get used to each other. This formulates a didactic concept for modern history teaching. It is no longer important to teach defined historical narratives, but rather to develop the ability in school to be able to relate the different stories to one another. And this basis, everyone can negotiate their own narrative and continue to develop it throughout their life. This would be a paradigm shift in historical education by the Waldorf Steiner schools. Thank you for your attention and apologize for my poor pronunciation.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. That was a very complex talk and
Yeah.
very precise and with much information. And I can imagine there are a lot of questions and comments. And actually, there's one question from Hala asking whether it's possible to join the Forum Geschichte and where to find informations about that.
No, now we have not a lot of publications. A lot is in progress, and the first publication will be in the spring of the next year and in the summertime. And then we have public results. And if you want to include, though, if you have an international background, it's very good to contact Martin. And in Germany, you can contact me. And the group is open. We have not a closed group which work on this, but we have an intensive exchange about all the needs. So 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting, 3 days in Mannheim, and we intensively had a discussion about what is the cultural understanding of Steiner and what is symptomatology. And we work in all levels because we are thinking it's necessary that we now think in a new way all our foundations. That's what we want. And that's not that all is wrong, but we need in the present time a kind of explanation, and that's important.
I think as everyone can see, it's really a new approach of doing history and have a critical consideration of how and what to bring from anthroposophy in the history teaching in Waldorf schools. Separation between myth and historical facts and stuff like that. And of course, also questioning this aspect of transformation or development and the Eurocentric aspect of teaching history in Waldorf schools all over the world and aspects like that. And in Germany, as far as I know, there is a also a critical debate around this project. And maybe it would be interesting if you can give a resume, maybe also Martin, a resume. What are the critical points you meet when you present your ideas, and how do you meet those arguments?
Yeah, we have a lot of reactions, indeed. So critics for Waldorf pedagogy are very interested, and they read all the articles and interviews. And they hope that we agree with their critical positions. That's one side. The other side, we have a lot of teachers and anthroposophists which have the worry that we kick out an important basis of the Waldorf pedagogy. And we have to realize it was really Steiner's intention to bring this cultural concept into the Waldorf schools. He expressive did it. And because of this, a lot of teachers think this is a basic of Waldorf pedagogy. But we want not to kick out, we want to transform. And that means the term essentialization. That means the idea that consciousness develop is a basis for us. But this transformation of human being is not in a sequence of fixed cultural epochs. This is more a quality in which we can describe all over the world the similar processes, settlement, after settlement, and end. And because of this, though we have to discuss it on several places. It was interesting, for example, the eurythmic group, which is responsible for in an international gremium to develop eurythmy. They invited me, and they very intensively discussed the cultural epochs, because they have very fixed norms to do and to realize it in eurythmy. And they feel that is too strong. And we lose the contact to the basis of the idea, the basis characterization. And we follow forms, but we don't know really what we express. And that's this big task of discussion. And it's a problem. You also published a lot about this. It's a problem how to recept Steiner. If we take the content of all the lecture as anthroposophy, then we believe a lot. But if we take it as a narrative which inspire us for own judgment, and then we take it in the individual responsibility, then I believe we can work with this. Martin, do you want to add something to the current situation?
I think you've summarized the main things. I mean, the anxiety is that by taking a few, let's say, dusty bricks out of the wall, that the wall itself will collapse. There are people who, in effect, treat, if you like, the complete works of Steiner as a complete entity in itself, and that any part that one would remove and question would put, in a way, the whole thing into question, which I think is actually it doesn't do Steiner justice. I mean, there are so many aspects of Steiner's work which have changed our way of looking at the world. There are many areas which we haven't even fully understood yet, and that here or there are aspects which are difficult to comprehend. And there are other aspects which are, as has already been said, are quite simply inappropriate today. We don't have to buy into them. We don't have to, we don't really even have to defend them. And I think that's the threshold, in a sense, that is being crossed, is that, you know, either we accept the entire edifice, 350 plus volumes, as kind of gospel truth, or we use this as a huge resource of work, which parts of which we find more relevant and useful to us than others. And I think if as a Waldorf movement, if we don't find a strong relationship to that, the danger is that people will either simply start ignoring anthroposophy. I mean, after all, Waldorf is a system. You can transmit, you can pass it on. You don't have to get involved in all this complicated stuff in the background. It's a method. It seems very successful. It functions. It can be transmitted and passed on and reproduced in this way. Why bother with all this anthroposophical stuff? And unless we find a new way, I think, of, as Michael has suggested, and as some of the other speakers have suggested in this series, we need to find new ways of accessing it so that we don't lose it.
Yeah. Can you please maybe explain it a bit more and make it a bit more clear for me? I have a question in mind. If you do pedagogy, of course, you have the concept of development. And with the concept of development, by itself, you have the idea of a hierarchy, so a higher development or lower development stage, so to speak. So if you think about development, there is higher and lower implemented. And you need it. If a teacher dealing with the children, you have a goal for the development of the child, and you see if you do those steps, you have more autonomy, for example, you have more freedom. And so we have this value of autonomy and freedom, and we try to guide the students to develop that idea of, or have a better understanding of our own individuality. Those are all values and goals of Waldorf education, and there's a hierarchy in it. And of course, on a cultural level, we have the same. So we say we don't want to have gender suppression. We don't want to have we want to have democracy, not totalitarianism, and so on. And we are happy to live in a culture which has some kind of democracy established and so on. And we try to teach that to our students in school, that there is if we have a historical view, there has been slavery all over the world, there has been totalitarianism all over the world, and we don't want to have it anymore. We want to have a society where individuals are equal, have equal rights and so on. So those are all values, and we teach them, and by those values, of course, we establish a hierarchy in history in relation to a time where those values didn't have a ruling in the society. And of course, if we have a view all over the world, we can name societies where there is no gender sensitivity and so on. So the question coming in from anthroposophy to say we have the consciousness soul, and this is some kind of a development stage in relation to a sentient soul. This is only a particular problem of history teaching, that the moment you have values, you stay for your values and you compare them to stages of history where those values, where there is slavery, may be part of normal social life. And just my question to make it a bit more clear, how do you deal with those aspects?
So in the background, Joost, we have to make a differentiation. And I don't know if my English is good enough to explain it, but the dignity of an individual depends not from his stand of development of thinking or consciousness. That's the first. Though on this level, we have to accept the dignity of human being. That's the first. The second is, yes, we realize history because human being is an autopoietic process. That means we have intention and we have aims. But it's different if the aim are from outside in a concept, or we decided that humans struggle and fight for, but they have own intentions to continue the self-creation. So that's the first. And the second is, so I'm not against development. And I believe we have to describe transformation with qualities. That's, I don't want to leave this, but I want to leave a stereotype narrative which places history in a wrong periodization and a wrong place. We have it in a wonderful diversity. And because of this, I think we can create platforms and we can describe from the different areas in the world what happened with the consciousness if I start to make agriculture. What happened with the circumstances of life and such things. And this is a wonderful, diverse picture. And we don't need so an artificial story, what was old India. That's more or less combined with element which has nothing to do, the most time, nothing to do with the really early stadium of history. And because of this...
Can I just ask one question? But you would bring, on a pedagogical level, it would be possible to bring in the myth of old India. That would be possible, or just
yeah, it's added.
history teaching.
But I believe we have a little bit two different levels. So I like the importance to tell myth in Waldorf pedagogy, Waldorf schools. I believe we should continue, and I believe it could be more. But myths are not factual history.
Okay.
Yeah, and I believe sometimes a myth can be a source for history because it's an expression how people understand the life.
Yeah.
But the content of a myth is a kind of explanation, and it's not a description of the reality, of the outside reality.
I see
And
this.
the pedagogical impulse for the history curriculum in Waldorf schools is to accompanying the progress of incarnation with history to the present time in class 8. And because of this, we have to start history in class 5 within real content of the world. And we know such things. And it's just, you can have strong soul experience with a description in which a way someone is living in the nature, in a communication with the inner soul world and the outside soul world. And you have established this. And this is not one story. This is another story in the perspective of South Africa or of the of Chinese culture and. So other people want to speak.
Yes, Sven and Martin.
Only briefly, I think one of our problems is that for all of us, history is a chronological thing. It starts in the past and finishes in the present. And to that, Waldorf tradition and Rudolf Steiner have now added a spatial dimension. It starts in the East and finishes in the West. And it's really hard to let go of that. And because of those two things, we think of history as something cumulative. It starts off with almost nothing and becomes more and more. And that's why your picture of development, Jost, is such a hierarchical one. But if we add the things that Steiner left out, so he doesn't talk about Australia, he hardly speaks about Chinese culture, then we begin to realize that both the space and the time narrative doesn't hold up. So if you take the Tao, for example, you can only read that from the perspective of with a consciousness soul, which according to our conventional undertaking wasn't even developed when it was written. So I think it liberates us in so many ways, the work that Michael and his colleagues are doing, by letting go of both the spatial and the temporal dimension, and really having a look at what is the development of consciousness right throughout the world.
And Sven, the importance is the transformation. That's not only a progress in time. Now, if we describe the old way of life, or a way of life, not old, a way of life in which people lived in the nature, in communication, then it's very, very current. It's not past. And this is important. We have to think transformation processes and not a progress in a line.
Yes.
Christoph.
No, Martin war zuerst. Martin.
Thank you. Just very briefly, two things. One is that just to follow on from both Sven and Mikko were saying, I think another way of looking at it is to say that our prehistory is not something in the far remote past, but it is in us. It is a level. It is a layer within our being that is part of us. And, you know, our whole kind of, I mean, evolutionary biology, we may criticize it, but the way we respond to the world, the way our bodies respond to the world has evolved over millions of years of experience with the earth. And that's not something that has just suddenly disappeared because we drive electric cars and live in big buildings. So our prehistory and all the other stages are within us. And the second thing is that of course is if you like, that's a stratigraphic metaphor. And within that is lower and higher. But the problem with the terms lower and higher is that these are value rather than position. You know, in a sense, you know, if we all remember a newborn child, you know, the first days of life on Earth, what that child is in its kind of consciousness and totality is something that we never achieve again in the rest of our lives. So what is higher and what is lower is relative to where we're standing. And the problem is that Western traditional colonial views have placed values on terms like higher and lower, which are simply demeaning to people. And I think today we have to respect there are a lot of people in the world who feel not seen, heard, and understood, because we, in our whiteness and our European self-understanding, we think we're beyond that. But we've positioned people, starting with women and people who look different to us, we've positioned them for thousands of years. And I think out of respect to them, we need to try and overcome these kinds of value judgments on it. And history is one way of contributing to that.
Christoph?
Thank you. I think this is a fantastic undertaking what our friends are doing there. Yeah, I think there is a lot of future in it. But for me, it's always also interesting what we have made out of the Waldorf School and what was the original intention. So I have done a lot of teaching in these grades, and I have seen, especially in Germany, by the way, that this 5th grade block is handled as history. I never found by Steiner that should be history. That 5th grade block is basically mythology. You present there different mythologies, and if you have taught there over the years, then you always felt a certain uncomfortable moment in your work when you leave the mythology, when you change into history. And I don't think that if you look at the development of a child, I'm not sure that you do in fifth grade really history. You prepare the awareness for the development of mankind through these mythologies. And then you can use the mythologies you want. Even you can do Atlantis, if it is a mythology, so what? So that's one thing that could make life much easier. If we tell the teachers in class 5 they should not play as a historian. They tell us just mythologies in this transition moment. In class 6, you have a total different mindset in the students than in class 5. And there you can start with real history, I think. But as you know, I'm not an expert. I'm a simple teacher.
Michael.
What do you think about that, Michael?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I would connect it, Christoph. I would connect it, for example, if you told something about a hunter which prepare to go to hunting, and then he has a lot of rituals, and he connect with the being, the higher being of the animal. And then you started to connect myth level with a concrete event. And I believe this dialogue is for me the key in class 5.
Yeah.
So not only myth and not only factual history, but to connect it so that the pupil have the experience, oh, this is a kind of explanation from the older or past cultures to the world.
Yeah.
But you have not to deconstruct it too much.
Yeah.
More
yeah.
to connect, because I think it's important that lesson has an outgoing point always in a concrete life. Yeah. Because if we don't have it, it's only dream. And we have to accompany incarnation. And because of this, I searched the link between these two levels. And now, I agree very much, myths are really important. It's a treasure for the whole life.
But now a practical example, huh? The 7 kings of Rome.
Yeah.
Is it mythology or history?
Yeah.
What you say?
It is a part of the way in which the ancient antiquity, the ancient people tell the history. That's a link. It is myth, but it's a kind in which the self-understanding of the Roman culture came into existence. It's a basis. And in this, it's a link.
Yeah.
But I have to you all also a question. Why we are so interesting for the right-wing extremists? We have to think about this, because it's more and more a danger.
Yeah,
we have to
my
think.
answer is it's not very practical, but my answer is we handle our lives in the Waldorf schools as a kind of a myth.
Yeah.
And that is of interest for these people.
Yeah.
We are not really in the world.
Yeah.
Or we do not take part enough on the world.
Yeah.
Would be my...
And they understand us at a safe hub of conservative values. That's a problem.
They understand us because we have a closed image about how the world should be.
Yeah.
And that's not anthroposophy.
And a lot of people which tell conspiracy theories.
Mm.
Yeah.
I would like to put another question, another aspect, and of course I'm not a historian, but just out of my own experience, when I met the historical view of Steiner and Waldorf education and of anthroposophy, there's always some kind of idealistic view on ancient times. So the old Egypt times, the old Greek times. Imagine how Goethe admires the Greek culture. So there is some kind of idealism connected to history. So this has been a way, and this time people lived a bit closer to the spirit or to the universe or whatever. And when I grew up as a child, I had some kind of melancholy, living in a poor time, so to speak. So my own time is much poorer and not as rich as I would like to be an old Greek person. So, and this is how idealistic history has been developed in the 19th century. And this is the impact in Steiner's way of doing history, of admiring the achievements of old times. And then the Marxist theory came in and has some kind of deconstruction of this kind of idealism. And then there is opposition between deconstructing idealism and on the one side, and doing history like Steiner does with a highly idealistic and admiring way of towards old cultures. And now what you're going to do is, my question is, how do you deal with idealism? And this, has it to be overcome? Is it naive? Is it a sentimental longing for a better time and feeling this our time is so poor and there is no real richness of the spirit anymore? And you can imagine what I mean. So how to deal with this feeling aspects? Being a child, it was wonderful just to see the images of a pyramid or something like that, or a Greek temple or so. Yeah, you want to answer later, and maybe first Carla and Martin.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was thinking what Professor Zech brought, this cosmopolitan way of looking at things, or I will go after these authors to understand it better, but if you have this key for searching on other cultural sources and not only ours, the Occidental way of thinking, you can search, for example, as you said, where does, in some other way, Africa, South America, or Oceania, when does it begin and how the impulse for agriculture? Here in South America, on the north of South America, we can learn from the pre-Incaic cultures, such high-level agriculture was developed there. And so that perhaps is pointing to a moment where this aspect of consciousness was born in different cultures. And then we are taking in count this aspect of cosmopolitanism that Professor Zech brought. That's what I was thinking, what we should together, and perhaps that's what you are researching on those 27 projects, is this kind of key that enables and make the teacher free to, with the key, go to other cultures and search for more things, and not only the Eurocentric point of view. That's what I was thinking here. Thank you very much.
You feel free to comment. Otherwise, I would like ask Martin to speak now.
Martin, and then I believe I have the final contribution.
Yes, we are just we are over 9 o'clock. You're right.
Okay, I think what Michael has presented in his little book that's in English on the history curriculum. He has reinterpreted, if you like, the cultural epochs in terms of social and cultural forms. And that you can apply anywhere in the world, because the reality is, of course, that indigenous agricultures were far more sustainable and productive than the agriculture that we have today. That farmers, Mayan farmers in the mountains of Mexico today, using their Three Sisters technique, produce more produce per square meter of ground than any farmer in the prairies of the United States using Monsanto seed and heavy tractors. I mean, that's just a fact today. And these indigenous understandings of the environment are far in advance of anything that Western science has yet to come up with. Western science has grown out of a mentality which went out and analyzed the world to death, destroyed it. Look at the climate discussions going on at the moment in Dubai. Look at how the world is struggling to even kind of make the simplest kind of steps towards sustainability. And indigenous cultures have that. And I think that these indigenous cultures need to be idealized in the way that Jos has just said for younger children. The problem is, or not the problem, the challenge is that if we're dealing with grade 5 children, grade 8 children, grade 11 young people, we're looking at history from very different perspectives. Yesterday, there was a report from Pompeii. You'd think that everything in Pompeii had long since been found, but it hasn't. There are new discoveries in Pompeii which show the abysmal conditions under which slaves and animals worked in the cellar of a luxury villa, grinding corn until they dropped dead. And this evidence has been found. We know that the life expectancy of slaves in the Athenian silver mines was a matter of weeks. Yeah. And so, but this would be inappropriate in grade 5. This would be probably inappropriate. We need to maybe touch the subject in the middle school. In the upper school, we need to look at this. We need to look at how history has idealized and valorized aspects which reflected 19th century, 20th century, 21st century perspectives. And today we have a pluralism of perspectives that we have to bring to expression. I'm teaching grade 9 at the moment, modern history. What have we done for 1.5 weeks? We're trying to make sense of how did this conflict in Gaza, Israel come about? What else would we be doing? We wouldn't be doing that lower down the school. So we have to work with the consciousness the young people have to address the real questions and to not ignore facts because they don't fit into our picture, but to find the right level to address them. So I think the framework that Michael has created is extremely useful anywhere in the world to look at your local historical developments, whether it's in farming or whether it's in other forms of economic life. And I think that will open up to us, it will free us from the framework that we've imposed because of the dominance of the Western scientific view. So maybe we should hand back to Michael.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you very much for the contributions. And I feel very connected with all the contributions, and especially Carla. I believe it's really important to realize that history as a subject has to change. The tradition of history is to legitimate national identity. And that in which way history came into existence in the 18th, 19th century. But now I believe we need a capacity, and this capacity is to train in school. And this means we have to learn to connect the diverse stories, the diverse narratives, and to learn. Though that's my idea of transformation, and you said it in a wonderful way, that we listen to other kinds of life in a historical dimension because we need it for our present time. Otherwise, it would be rubbish. It is only interesting to deal with the past time if I find impulses for myself. And Jost, I also agree very much, like Christoph, that the atmosphere for the child has to be protected. And it's important. But history in Waldorf schools has 3 levels. And I described it. And in class 12, we have a reflection about our own consciousness. We have to learn to be stranger in the own.
Yep.
And before, we have to discuss and to think. And before, the class teacher tell us the world. And that's wonderful. And this is really a good step, a follow of steps. And we have to think it all. And class 5 is not the end of history. That's only one element. That's important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to the audience, and thank you to all the speakers during this last International Campus Waldorf. This is our last meeting today. I wish you a good Christmas time wherever you are, and a happy New Year 2024. And we will prepare the next International Campus Waldorf maybe starting in April or May. So if you have any suggestions for a topic, for a speaker, for something which might be valuable and good that we presented in the International Campus Waldorf, please let me know. So write an email to our address, and I think we will start the next season in September 24. All the best for you. Have a good time and good night for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
ขอบคุณ
Thank
ค่ะ
you very much. Boa noite.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye